A silent orphan girl. A loving father. But when she speaks her first English word, he grabs the phone and dials 911. What did she say that changed everything? James Holden never planned on becoming a father. At 42, he was set in his ways, working as a mechanic in a small Seattle suburb, spending his evenings fixing up old cars, and living alone in his modest house. His past as an Army veteran had taught him discipline, resilience, and how to survive under pressure. But nothing could have prepared him for what was about to change his life forever. It started with a photograph. One evening, as he absent-mindedly scrolled through social media, an image stopped him cold. It was a little girl, maybe 6 or 7 years old, sitting on a worn-out bed in what looked like an orphanage. Her dark, hollow eyes stared straight into the camera, empty, lost. The caption read, "Lena. Orphaned in a fire. No known relatives. Silent since the incident." James wasn't the kind of man who made impulsive decisions. He always thought things through, weighed the risks. But something about that child stirred something deep in him, something raw and instinctual. Without overthinking, he clicked the contact link. 2 months later, he was standing in an airport, gripping a small duffel bag, his heart pounding in his chest. The adoption process had been complicated, full of paperwork, home evaluations, and endless interviews. He wasn't even sure if he had convinced himself that he was ready. But now there was no turning back. The plane landed. The doors opened. And there she was. A thin, pale girl with dark, shoulder-length hair and eyes that looked too old for her young face. She was clutching a small stuffed bear, worn, patched, like it had seen too much. A social worker beside her murmured something in a language James didn't understand, then nudged the girl forward. James took a slow breath and knelt to her level. "Hey, sweetheart. I'm James. I guess I'm your dad now." She didn't react. Not a nod, not a blink. Just that steady, unreadable stare. James hesitated before reaching out his hand. For a long moment, she just looked at it. Then, slowly, she placed her tiny fingers in his palm. Her hand was ice cold. Something about that touch sent a shiver down his spine. The ride home was silent. The social worker had warned him, "She doesn't talk, hasn't since the fire. Trauma," they said. "She might never speak again." James glanced at her through the rearview mirror. She sat stiffly, hands gripping the seatbelt, staring out the window as the city lights blurred past. "Hungry?" he asked. No response. He tried again. "We can stop for food if you want. Burgers? Pizza?" Nothing. She was like a ghost sitting in the back seat, present but somehow, not. When they finally reached the house, James unlocked the front door and stepped aside to let her in. She hesitated before crossing the threshold, her eyes scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. "It's not much," he admitted. "But it's home." She took a tentative step inside, still clutching the stuffed bear like a lifeline. James rubbed the back of his neck. Your room's this way. Come on." She followed without a word. Her bedroom was simple, a twin bed, a small dresser, a bookshelf filled with a few children's books he had picked up at the last minute. She stepped inside and stood in the center of the room, her gaze drifting across the walls, the bed, the window. "Do you like it?" he asked, feeling oddly nervous. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked to the bed and sat down, staring at her hands. James sighed. "All right, kid. I'll let you get settled." He hesitated at the door. "If you need anything, I'm just down the hall." Still, no response. As he left the room, he glanced back one last time. She was still sitting there, unmoving. Something about her silence unnerved him. But he pushed the thought away. She just needed time. That's what the social workers had said. Time to heal. Time to feel safe. Time to find her voice again. James could be patient. What he didn't know was that when she finally did speak, it would change everything. The first few weeks were a test of patience. Lena didn't speak. Not a single word. James had expected an adjustment period, but the silence was heavier than he imagined. It wasn't just that she didn't talk, she barely made a sound at all. No laughter, no humming, no small gasps of surprise. Even her footsteps were eerily light, like she had learned to move through the world unnoticed. She was polite in her own way, never throwing tantrums, never refusing food, never making a mess. But she kept her distance. If James sat on the couch, she sat at the far end. If he cooked dinner, she would wait until he left the kitchen before quietly taking her plate. The only real sign of life in her was her curiosity. She watched him. Always. At first, James thought he was imagining it. But over time, he realized, whenever he moved around the house, she was there, silently observing. If he fixed something under the sink, she'd peek from the hallway. If he worked on an engine in the garage, he'd glance up and see her small figure standing in the doorway, watching. It was unsettling, but he never confronted her about it. One night, as he washed the dishes, he felt that familiar gaze on him again. He turned his head slightly and saw her sitting at the kitchen table, legs tucked under her, hugging that same worn-out stuffed bear. "Do you want to help?" he asked. She didn't answer. He set the dish down and wiped his hands. "You don't have to, but if you want, I can show you how." For a moment, she didn't move. Then, to his surprise, she slid off the chair and padded over to him. James handed her a small plate. "Just run it under the water first, like this." He demonstrated, then passed it to her. She mimicked his movements, carefully rubbing the sponge over the surface. He smiled. "See? Easy." She didn't smile back, but she washed 3 more plates before quietly stepping away. It wasn't much, but to James, it felt like a victory. At night, though, the silence became something else. The first time it happened, James was asleep. Then, suddenly, a feeling, like something wasn't right. His eyes snapped open, and his heart kicked up when he saw a shadow standing in his doorway. For a split second, his military instincts kicked in, he was ready to reach for the gun in his nightstand. But then he recognized her. Lena. She stood barefoot in the dim light of the hallway, her small frame rigid, her hands clenched around her stuffed bear. James sat up. "Lena?" She didn't respond. He turned on the lamp, the soft glow making her features clearer. She looked pale. Wide-eyed. Not scared. But, alert. "Did you have a bad dream?" he asked gently. No answer. She just stood there. A long beat passed before she finally turned and walked away, disappearing back into the dark hallway. James exhaled, running a hand down his face. That was weird. But maybe it was normal. Kids had nightmares, right? Maybe she just wanted to make sure he was still there. Still, something about the way she had just stood there, not shaking, not crying, just watching, left a cold feeling in his stomach. The next night, it happened again. This time, James left the door cracked open. When his eyes blinked open in the middle of the night, he didn't need to sit up to know she was there. The shadow in the doorway. Still. Silent. Watching. A slow unease crept through him. Why didn't she say anything? Why didn't she move? James cleared his throat. "Lena? What's wrong?" "Nothing." Then, finally, after what felt like an eternity, she turned, not walked, not hurried, just turned, and drifted back down the hall. James sat up, rubbing his temples. This wasn't normal. Something was wrong. But he didn't know what. All he knew was that every night, at exactly 2:13 a.m., Lena would stand in his doorway, silent as a ghost. And every night, his gut told him something was watching her, too. The strange nighttime visits continued. Every night, at exactly 2:13 a.m., James would wake to find Lena standing in his doorway. She never spoke, never moved, never cried. Just stood there, clutching that worn-out stuffed bear, staring at him with those deep, unreadable eyes. It unnerved him. At first, he told himself it was trauma. Kids who had been through hell sometimes acted in ways that didn't make sense. Maybe she was sleepwalking. Maybe she was just checking to see if he was still there. But the way she stood, so rigid, so still, it didn't feel like the behavior of a scared child. It felt like something else. Then, one night, things escalated. James was exhausted from work. He had been under a car for most of the day, fixing a transmission, and his muscles ached. He barely made it to bed before passing out. The sound woke him up. Not footsteps. Not breathing. A slow, scraping noise. His eyes snapped open. Lena wasn't in the doorway this time. She was closer. Much closer. She was standing right beside his bed. James tensed, forcing his body to stay calm. His military instincts told him not to react too fast, not to startle her. He exhaled slowly. Lena. She didn't move. The dim glow of the street lamp outside cast just enough light through the window for him to see her face. She looked blank. No fear. No emotion. But her fingers were clenched so tightly around her stuffed bear that her knuckles had gone white. Then he heard it. The noise. Scrape. 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 His breath caught in his throat. It wasn't coming from her. It was coming from somewhere else in the house. James swung his legs over the bed, his pulse spiking. "Stay here," he murmured, grabbing the baseball bat he kept beside the nightstand. She didn't react. He moved past her and stepped into the hallway. The air felt thick, like the house itself was holding its breath. Scrape. 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 It was coming from the front door. James's grip tightened around the bat as he moved through the darkness, his senses on high alert. He didn't turn on the lights. Didn't want to alert whoever was outside. He reached the door and pressed his ear against it. Silence. He exhaled and slowly unlocked it, just enough to peek outside. Nothing. No footprints. No movement. Just the empty street, bathed in the pale glow of the streetlights. Then his gaze dropped. Something was on the doorstep. A piece of paper, crumpled and damp from the night air. James bent down and picked it up, unfolding it with cautious fingers. His stomach dropped. The message was scrawled in shaky, uneven handwriting. "She is mine. Return her." A chill ran down his spine. James spun around, his heart hammering, and hurried back inside, locking the door behind him. Lena was still in his room, exactly where he had left her. He knelt in front of her, gripping her small shoulders. "Lena," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Who is looking for you?" For the first time since she had arrived, she reacted. Her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something. But then, her gaze flickered past him, toward the window. James turned. Nothing was there. Just the wind stirring the trees. When he looked back, Lena had already turned and walked back to her room, disappearing into the shadows. James sat there for a long time, the paper still clenched in his fist, a terrible feeling settling deep in his gut. Someone wanted her back. And they weren't going to stop. James barely slept that night. He lay awake, gripping the crumpled note, his mind racing. "She is mine. Return her." Who the hell had left it? And why? He had been careful throughout the adoption process. The agency had assured him that Lena had no surviving family, no known connections. She had come from a foreign orphanage, and her past was sealed in a thick file of bureaucratic reports. So who was claiming her now? James got up before dawn, making sure every door and window in the house was locked. Then he went to the garage, pulling down an old wooden box from a high shelf. Inside, among dusty dog tags and faded military patches, was his gun. He checked the magazine. Loaded. The weight of the weapon in his hands was familiar. Comforting. He wasn't taking any chances. By the time Lena woke up, he had already made breakfast. She entered the kitchen as silent as ever, her dark eyes flickering toward him, then toward the front door, as if she already knew what had happened last night. James forced a smile. Made pancakes. Hope you like ham. She climbed onto a chair, picked up a fork, and ate without a sound. As she chewed, James sat across from her, watching carefully. I need you to tell me something, sweetheart, he said gently. Do you know who left that note? Lena froze mid-bite. Her grip on the fork tightened. James leaned forward. If there's something I need to know, you can tell me. You're safe here. She stared down at her plate. Then, slowly, she shook her head. James sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. Maybe she truly didn't know. Or maybe she was too scared to say it. Either way, pushing her wouldn't help. After breakfast, James dropped her off at school, but the uneasy feeling in his gut never left. He stayed parked outside for a while, scanning the street, looking for anything, or anyone, out of place. Nothing. Still, something told him he was being watched. Later that afternoon, when he picked her up, the school receptionist hesitated before handing Lena over. Mr. Holden, she said carefully. A man was here earlier. He asked about your daughter. James's pulse spiked. What man? She shook her head. He didn't give his name. He just asked if Lena was still enrolled here. When I told him we couldn't give out that kind of information, he left. But I don't know, something about him felt off. James crouched down next to Lena, who stood quietly by his side. Did you see him? He asked. She nodded. A chill ran through him. Do you know who he was? She hesitated. Then, barely above a whisper, she said the first English word he had ever heard from her lips. Bad. James felt his stomach twist. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Someone was looking for her. And whoever they were, she was terrified of them. He tightened his grip on her hand. Come on, kid, he murmured. We're going home. But even as they drove away from the school, James could feel it, like a shadow stretching over them. Something wasn't right. And it was getting closer. James had always trusted his instincts. They had kept him alive through deployments, through nights spent in hostile territory, through situations where one wrong move meant death. And right now, his instincts were screaming at him. Someone was after Lena. She knew it. He knew it. The problem was, he didn't know who. Or why. That night, he double-checked the locks, installed a second deadbolt on the front door, and positioned an old hunting knife under his pillow. He wasn't taking any chances. Lena, as always, was quiet. But there was a change in her now, something small, but noticeable. She stayed close to him, not in an obvious way, but she lingered in the same room longer, glanced at him more often, like she was making sure he was still there. She was scared. And that scared him. James tucked her into bed, brushing a strand of dark hair from her face. You need anything, kid? She shook her head but hesitated before gripping his wrist. James froze. It was the first time she had ever reached for him. Her fingers were cold, trembling slightly. Hey, he said softly. I won't let anything happen to you. She searched his face for a long time. Then, finally, she let go, rolling over onto her side, her stuffed bear clutched tightly to her chest. James sat beside her until her breathing evened out, slow and steady. Then he exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face, before heading back to his own room. He didn't expect to sleep. And he was right. At exactly 2:13 a.m., he woke up. Not to silence. To a sound. Click. 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 James's blood ran cold. It was coming from outside the bedroom window. Moving purely on instinct, he reached under his pillow and gripped the handle of the hunting knife. Click. 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 A steady, deliberate tapping. Someone was there. James forced himself to move slowly, carefully sliding out of bed without making a sound. He kept to the shadows as he approached the window. The curtain was drawn. The tapping had stopped. For a moment, everything was silent. James reached out, grabbed the curtain, and yanked it open. Nothing. The backyard was empty, the street beyond it quiet. The only movement came from the trees swaying in the wind. Then he saw it. A single handprint, smeared across the glass. It wasn't Lena's. Too big. Too high up. And it was fresh. James tightened his grip on the knife, his jaw clenching. He scanned the yard again, this time slower, sharper. Someone had been here. Watching. Testing. And then he noticed something else. A piece of paper, stuck to the outside of the window. His stomach twisted as he peeled it off. 2 words, written in uneven, shaky letters. She knows. James's heart pounded against his ribs. What the hell did that mean? His mind was already racing through possibilities when he heard it, soft, light footsteps. He turned. Lena was standing in his doorway. Her small frame was illuminated by the hallway light behind her, casting long shadows across the floor. James swallowed, forcing his voice to stay steady. Did you hear something? She didn't answer. But she was looking at the note. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said something that made his blood turn to ice. He's inside. James didn't hesitate. He grabbed her, pulling her behind him, his heart pounding as he scanned the dark corners of the room. Silence. Then, a creak. Not from the bedroom. From down the hall. James moved fast, yanking open the nightstand drawer and pulling out his gun. He flicked the safety off, guiding Lena behind him as he stepped out of the room. The hallway stretched out before them, quiet, empty. But he knew better. Someone had been inside. Maybe still was. James's grip tightened around the gun as he reached the living room. He flipped on the light. Nothing. But something felt off. Then his eyes landed on the front door. It was unlocked. He knew for a fact he had locked it. His skin prickled. Someone had been inside the house. And they had left before he got to them. James turned to Lena. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow. But she wasn't crying. She wasn't panicking. She was staring at the door. Like she was waiting. Or maybe, listening. James knelt in front of her, gripping her shoulders gently. Lena, listen to me. You have to tell me who this is. Who's looking for you? Her lip trembled. For a second, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, barely above a whisper, she finally said it. One name. A name that meant nothing to him. But he could see the terror in her eyes. James tightened his jaw. Whoever this man was, he wasn't getting anywhere near her. Not while James was still breathing. James barely breathed as he knelt in front of Lena, his fingers still gripping her small shoulders. The name she had spoken was foreign to him, but the fear in her voice told him everything he needed to know. This wasn't just some stranger. This was someone who had hurt her. Someone who wanted her back. James kept his voice steady. "Who is he?" Lena didn't answer. Her breathing was uneven, her small hands shaking as she clutched the worn-out bear against her chest. Her body had gone tense, her eyes darting toward the front door, as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. James exhaled slowly, trying to stay calm. He needed information. But pushing her too hard could shut her down completely. So he softened his tone. "It's okay, kid. You're safe here. But I need to know." A sudden noise cut him off. A thud. From outside. James moved on instinct, yanking Lena behind him and raising his gun. His body went rigid, every nerve in his system on high alert. The house was silent. But someone, was out there. James moved carefully, keeping Lena close as he made his way toward the window. He peered outside, scanning the darkness. Nothing. But then. A shadow. Just beyond the streetlight. Too far to make out details, but he knew someone was standing there, watching the house. James's jaw clenched. He didn't hesitate. He threw the front door open and stepped onto the porch, gun raised. "Hey," he barked. "You want something?" The shadow didn't move. James took another step forward, his grip tightening on the weapon. "You have 3 seconds to tell me what the hell you're doing on my property." The figure moved. Not forward. Sideways. Slipping into the darkness between houses, disappearing as if they had never been there at all. James cursed under his breath, heart pounding. He wanted to chase after them, but Lena. He spun back toward the house. She was still standing in the doorway. And she was shaking. James immediately lowered the gun and rushed to her, crouching in front of her small frame. "It's okay, kid. He's gone." But she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the spot where the figure had been. And then, in a voice so soft he barely heard it, she whispered. "Not gone." James's blood ran cold. This wasn't over. Not even close. He didn't sleep. Not that night. Not the next. He barely let Lena out of his sight. He called the police, but without a clear description or evidence of a break-in, there wasn't much they could do. "A note on your doorstep isn't a crime, Mr. Holden," the officer said over the phone. "Neither is someone standing in the street." James wanted to punch something. Someone had been in his house. Someone had left a message. And they were still watching. After the call, he sat at the kitchen table, rubbing his temples. Lena sat across from him, silent as always, tracing circles on the wooden surface with her fingertip. James watched her carefully. She was hiding something. Something big. And he was done waiting for answers. "Lena," he said, voice steady. "I need you to tell me everything. Right now." She didn't react at first. Then, slowly, she met his gaze. For the first time, she looked at him, not just through him, not past him, but at him. And when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I ran away." James frowned. "From where?" She hesitated. "Not orphanage." His chest tightened. "Then where, sweetheart?" Lena's hands curled into fists on the table. Her next words made his stomach drop. "From him." James swallowed hard. "The man from last night?" A tiny nod. He leaned forward. "Did he hurt you?" Her fingers dug into the wood. She didn't answer. Which was answer enough. James exhaled, trying to control the rage rising inside him. "Lena, listen to me. He is not getting you back. Ever. But I need to know, who is he?" What does he want? She was quiet for a long time. Then, in a voice so small he almost missed it, she whispered. He buys kids. James felt something deep in his chest snap. The kind of anger that wasn't hot, but ice cold. A slow, burning fury. He forced himself to stay calm. He what? Lena didn't look at him. He takes kids. Sells them. James felt sick. This wasn't just some obsessed relative or a man from her past. This was something worse. And now, he had taken in a child that someone considered unfinished business. James pushed his chair back, standing. He grabbed his phone and dialed the police again. But before the call even connected, Lena spoke. And what she said made his blood freeze. They won't help. James frowned. What do you mean? Of course they will. Lena finally lifted her eyes to his. And the look on her face, so knowing, so certain, made his stomach turn. She spoke 3 words. They work for him. James stood frozen, the phone still pressed to his ear. The call hadn't connected yet, but Lena's words had already paralyzed him. They work for him. His breath was steady, but his mind was racing. The police? Corrupt? It wasn't impossible. He had seen it before, especially in cases involving human trafficking. If the man hunting Lena was powerful enough, then sure, he could have people in his pocket. But how did she know? James slowly lowered the phone, his grip tightening around it. How do you know that? Lena's fingers curled around the sleeves of her sweater. I saw them. Before. James crouched in front of her, searching her face. You saw the police with him? A tiny nod. His stomach twisted. Lena wasn't lying. She didn't have to. He could see it in her eyes, the way her whole body tensed at the mention of them, the way she refused to look at the phone in his hand. James took a slow breath. The police were out. That meant he was on his own. He turned off his phone and tossed it onto the counter. If they were compromised, he wasn't taking any risks. He needed another plan. Something fast. Something that would put him in control. Lena was still watching him, waiting. James forced himself to sound calm. All right, kid. No cops. Got it. But that means we need to handle this ourselves. You trust me? For the first time since she arrived, she didn't hesitate. She nodded. James pushed himself to his feet. Good. Because I'm going to make sure no one ever takes you again. James had spent most of his life preparing for war. He just never thought it would be in his own home. By morning, he had made a plan. Step 1, go off the grid. They couldn't stay here. If the guy had been inside the house once, he could do it again. And if the police were involved, there was no safe place in town. James packed only essentials, cash, a burner phone he hadn't used in years, his gun, and enough food to last a few days. Lena packed her bear. Nothing else. He loaded her into his truck, scanning the neighborhood one last time before pulling onto the road. Lena sat in silence, small and still in the passenger seat. She didn't ask where they were going. She already knew they were running. James took back roads, avoiding main highways. He drove for hours, stopping only once at a gas station outside of town. Even then, he kept the truck running, his eyes on every exit. But no one came. No black SUVs. No strangers watching them from the corner of the lot. Maybe they had gotten ahead of it. Maybe they had bought themselves time. James wasn't betting on it. After filling up the tank, he climbed back into the truck and pulled onto the highway. Lena's voice was quiet. Where? It was the most she had spoken at once. James glanced at her. Somewhere safe. I've got a cabin up north. No one knows about it. She turned to look out the window, her fingers gripping the bear in her lap. They will. James clenched his jaw. She was right. They weren't just dealing with a regular criminal. This was someone with money, power, connections. Someone who had been patient enough to track her this far. If James wanted to win, he needed to stop running. He needed to fight back. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was setting. It was small, tucked deep in the woods, miles away from the nearest town. He had built it himself years ago, after the army, thinking he might need a place to disappear someday. He just never thought he'd be taking a kid with him. Lena followed him inside, her eyes scanning the space: bare floors, a fireplace, an old couch, and a locked cabinet full of weapons. James dropped his bag on the table. It's not much, but it's secure. No internet, no phone lines. No one will find us here. Lena didn't say anything. She just walked over to the fireplace and sat down on the floor, pulling her knees to her chest. James sat across from her, elbows on his knees. We'll stay here until I figure out who this guy is. Once we know that, we'll know how to stop him. Lena's gaze lifted to his. Something dark flickered in her eyes. You can't stop him. James's spine went rigid. There was something in her voice, something cold. Something that didn't belong in the voice of a child. You don't know that, he said carefully. She swallowed. I do. James leaned forward. Tell me why. Lena hesitated. Then, her voice barely above a whisper, she said. Because I wasn't the only one. James's body locked up. His pulse thumped in his ears. What do you mean? Lena's fingers dug into the fabric of her sweater. He had more. Like me. James inhaled sharply. More kids? She nodded, her face pale. Lots. Some were taken. Some never came back. His hands curled into fists. This wasn't just about Lena anymore. This was bigger. Bigger than one man. Bigger than one girl escaping. This was an entire operation. And Lena, his kid, was the one who had gotten away. Which meant they wouldn't stop hunting her. Unless James stopped them first. His voice was steady when he spoke. Do you know where? Lena didn't answer. She just reached into the pocket of her sweater. And pulled out a folded, crumpled photograph. James took it carefully. The image was old, worn. A building, concrete and gray, surrounded by trees. No signs. No markings. But at the bottom, scrawled in messy handwriting, were the coordinates. James's heart pounded as he read the numbers. This was it. This was where it had happened. Where the others still were. Lena was watching him, waiting. James met her gaze and gave a slow nod. You're right, kid, he murmured. We're not running anymore. James had made a decision. They weren't running anymore. Lena had escaped something big, something that had swallowed countless other children whole. And now, those people wanted her back. Too bad for them. James had spent his entire life in combat. He wasn't just some mechanic from a small town, he was a soldier, trained to track, to eliminate threats, to dismantle operations just like this one. And this time, it was personal. He unfolded the photograph again, his eyes locked on the coordinates scribbled at the bottom. His pulse was steady, his mind already working through the logistics. A rescue mission. But first, he had to make sure Lena was safe. She sat by the fireplace, small and quiet, watching him with those deep, knowing eyes. James crouched in front of her. I need you to listen carefully, kid. She nodded. I'm going to take care of this. But I need to know, do you want to come with me, or do you want to stay here? Lena didn't hesitate. With you. James studied her face. She wasn't just afraid anymore. She was determined. And somehow, that made him prouder than anything else in his life. "All right," he said. "Then let's end this." They drove through the night. James had mapped out the location on an old GPS, deep in the woods, far from any major roads. Whatever this place was, it wasn't meant to be found. Which meant they were heading straight into enemy territory. He was ready. He had his gun, his knife, and enough ammunition to fight his way out if it came to that. But he wasn't planning on a fight. He was planning on ending this before it started. Lena barely spoke during the drive. She just stared at the road ahead, clutching that stuffed bear in her lap like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. James reached over, squeezing her hand. "You're not going back there," he promised. She didn't look at him, but she nodded. She believed him. They reached the compound just before dawn. It was worse than James expected. The place was massive, an old industrial facility, surrounded by fences and patrolled by men with rifles. This wasn't just some hidden hideout. This was a full-scale operation. A machine designed to traffic children. Lena's whole body had gone rigid. She recognized this place. James exhaled slowly, forcing his emotions down. "Stay sharp. Stay focused. You remember how many people were inside?" he asked. She hesitated, then held up 4 fingers. James nodded. "Guards." She hesitated again. Then, carefully, she raised 2 fingers. 4 captors. 2 armed. He had handled worse odds. James turned to her, his expression serious. "You're staying in the truck. No matter what happens, you don't move unless I tell you to." Lena's lip trembled. "What if you don't come back?" James smirked. "Then you start the truck and drive straight through that damn gate." She blinked. Then, slowly, she smiled. For the first time. James reached over and ruffled her hair. "Lock the doors, kid." Then he stepped out. The first guard never saw him coming. James moved through the shadows like a ghost, silent and efficient. One well-placed strike to the throat, and the man crumpled without a sound. The second guard put up a fight. James didn't give him a chance to draw his weapon. He slammed the man's head into the concrete, knocking him out cold. That left the captors. 4 men. And James had no mercy left. He moved fast. Calculated. Precise. The first went down with a knife to the leg, followed by a brutal elbow strike to the temple. The second managed to grab a gun. James shot him before he could aim. The third tried to run. James caught him. And he made sure the man suffered before going unconscious. The last man, the leader, tried to fight. Big mistake. James grabbed him by the collar, slamming him against the wall. "How many kids are inside?" The man gritted his teeth. "Go to hell." James twisted his arm until it snapped. The man screamed. "Try again," James growled. 5, he choked out. "There's 5 left." The others were all ready. He didn't finish the sentence. James wanted to kill him. But he wasn't done yet. He knocked the man out cold and moved inside. The children were terrified. Locked in a back room, small and fragile, barely more than shadows in the dark. James crouched down, keeping his voice calm. "I'm here to get you out." They didn't move. Didn't believe him. Until Lena. A small girl gasped, running past James and throwing her arms around the tiny frame standing in the doorway. Lena hugged her back, whispering something in a language James didn't understand. That was all the others needed. They trusted her. And if she trusted James, so did they. He gathered them quickly, leading them out, keeping them close. His gun was still drawn, his senses sharp. No more guards. No more threats. They reached the truck. Lena climbed in first, pulling the others with her. James jumped behind the wheel, heart pounding, adrenaline still burning through his veins. Then. Headlights. In the distance. More were coming. James slammed the gas. The truck roared forward, tearing down the dirt road, plowing straight through the gate. Bullets followed. They missed. James didn't. One quick shot to the tires of the approaching vehicles, and they skidded off the road. And just like that, they were gone. The children were safe. James had made sure of that. By morning, they were across state lines, at a safe house run by people who weren't corrupt. People James trusted. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. These kids had a chance now. Lena had a chance. And James? James had done what he promised. She was never going back. As they sat on the hood of the truck, watching the sun rise, Lena leaned against him. For the first time, she looked at peace. James wrapped an arm around her. "You're gonna be okay, kid." She hesitated. Then, for the first time, she spoke without fear. "I know, Dad." James's breath caught. Not James. Not Mr. Holden. Dad. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. "Yeah, kid," he murmured, pulling her close. "You're home now." This story is about more than just survival. It's about resilience, about fighting for something bigger than yourself. At its core, it's about the power of unconditional love, the kind that isn't defined by blood, but by choice. James never planned on becoming a father, but when the moment came, he became everything Lena needed him to be, her protector, her guardian, her family. And in return, she gave him something just as powerful. A reason to fight. A reason to stay. Lena, despite everything she had been through, didn't just survive, she reclaimed her life. She didn't let fear define her, and in the end, she found something even greater than safety. She found a home. A father. A future. The road wasn't easy. The scars of the past don't just fade overnight. But for the first time, she wasn't running. She was free. And that's what makes this ending so powerful, not just that they won, but that they found each other. Because sometimes, family isn't about where you come from. It's about who chooses to stand by your side, no matter what.